Five Nights at Treasure Island is a FNAF fan game that really nails it in the environment department. Set in an abandoned Disney attraction, this game pits us against twisted, decrepit versions of Disney characters. Upon the first demo's release, this game immediately became a classic in the world of FNAF fan games, and major YouTubers would upload full playthroughs of everything the game had to offer at the time. So, when Radiant's team announced a sequel to Five Nights at Treasure Island, naturally the community was very excited. This sequel, upon its release, quickly built up a reputation of being really difficult. Set in a house this time, this sequel would once again pit us against horrific versions of Disney characters, and once again, it really nailed it in the environment department. This is the story of how I conquered Five Nights at Treasure Island's official sequel, Oblitus Casa. This is part 4 of my ladder series, where I intend to build up to and beat some of the hardest FNAF challenges in the world, though we're still just getting started. When I was first picking the challenges for the ladder, I wasn't expecting to see any names I recognized this high up on the max mode list, and yet there it was, placed at number 47 at the time, Oblitus Casa. Not some reboot or remake or buff mod of it, just the Oblitus Casa, the same one you've probably seen all your favorite YouTubers playing. So naturally, I felt this would be a great challenge to add. I didn't really know anything about the game, I hadn't even seen any playthroughs of it outside of briefly stopping by a David Barron livestream, but if I was going to spend days grinding out a FNAF challenge, I might as well make it something of decent quality. Fast forward to August of last year, and it was finally time for me to take on Oblitus Casa. Unlike other FNAF challenges I've attempted until now, this game actually had a campaign attached to it, so it's pretty fun to just play through that while talking to my livestream chat. Once we complete the main game, we unlock the custom night. Well, at least half of it. You see, Oblitus Casa's main game actually only has 6 of its characters, and by default, the custom night only has these 6 characters unlocked. But there are 6 more characters that we need to unlock by completing various challenges before we can attempt this game's max mode, True Nightmare. Unlocking these characters was also pretty chill, with the exception of Corruptus, who makes us take on the Nightmare preset. The Nightmare preset gives me the perfect opportunity to introduce you to the Antagonists for this video. Well, at least the first 6 of them. First up is Willy. He moves through the cameras towards your room and can be lured by holding down a music box. Unlike Five Nights at Freddy's 3, this music box will always work provided Willy is close enough. However, there is a catch. The music boxes in Oblitus Casa have finite usage. After luring Willy a certain number of times, the music box will eventually deplete, and we can't use it again for the rest of the entire night. Luckily, every camera has its own music box, so if we run out of music box usage on one camera, we could just choose a different camera to lure to. The idea to deal with Willy is to lure him to a faraway camera at the start of the night and lure him back whenever he moves. Then, once that camera runs out, we switch to a different camera to lure him to until the night is over. Next up is Daisy. Daisy can appear on the cameras every time you switch the camera you are looking at. On 20 AI, this actually happens every other camera switch. Pulling up or down the cameras does not contribute to when Daisy will appear, only switching cameras will. When Daisy appears, we need to use our flash beacon to get rid of her. If Daisy appears and we take too long, or switch to another camera before we flash her, Daisy will appear in our room making one of the most annoying sounds I've ever heard, and disabling your cameras for an amount of time I can only describe as lethal. The corrupted face may occasionally appear in our attic, signaled by a stepping sound. When he does, we need to go into the attic and shine our lighter in his face twice. Pretty straightforward. Photonegative Minnie will wander towards our room similar to Willy, but she can't be lured by the music box. Instead, we need to flash her with the camera beacon to send her back a camera. The camera beacon has a bit of a cooldown, so ideally we flash both Minnie and Daisy together. Pete can also appear in our attic, but is the complete opposite of Corrupted Face. If you see Pete in the attic, do not light your lighter or he will kill you on the spot. Don't mind me, just gonna... there we go. Finally, Dippy, who is definitely not goofy by the way, is pretty similar to Willy where he moves around and can be lured by the music box. But unlike Willy, Dippy does not approach your office. Rather, Dippy wants to get to camera 9 so he can smash your window and kill you from there. Ideally, we will also want to lure Willy and Dippy at the same time, so cameras 1, 7, and 5 are some of the best jails for us to put these guys in. And that is all the characters you will encounter in the base game of Oblitus Casa. See, only 6. There is no Belial. Belial is a lie made up by eraser companies to sell more. Okay, fine, there's one more character that doesn't appear in the custom night menu for some reason. Belial will slowly materialize onto your notepad. To keep her at bay, you need to move your mouse left and right over her drawing in order to erase it. Failure to do so will cause Belial to appear in your room, making a really loud screeching sound and causing all other animatronics to become extra aggressive. Okay, now that we actually have all the characters for this preset introduced, we can go over some basic strategies. First off, like I mentioned earlier, we want to lure Willy and Dippy together at all times, as killing 2 birds with 1 stone here can save us valuable time. Another thing I need to mention is the flash beacon. This thing has a bit of a cooldown, so if you flash Daisy right before Minnie, you'll probably have to sit there on Minnie's camera waiting until the beacon comes back online. So what we will ideally want to do is actually manipulate when Daisy will spawn. As I said earlier, on 20 AI, Daisy will spawn every other camera change. So if we swap to a camera and Daisy doesn't show up, we know for sure that she will appear next time we switch cameras. We could take advantage of this to make sure that Daisy always spawns on the same camera as Minnie, which lets us flash both of them at the same time. This is one of the most satisfying parts of Oblitus Casa for me. So how do we pull off this manipulation? Well, when we pull up the cameras, usually the first thing we do is switch to whatever camera we are currently luring Willy and Dippy to. If we see Daisy here, then we need to click onto a random camera before switching to Minnie's camera. And if we don't see Daisy here, we just go directly to Minnie's camera. It sounds scary at first, but it's really easy to learn and get used to. And like I said, it is very satisfying to pull off. But now for the cycle of the night. At the start of the night, we're going to want to immediately lure Willy and Dippy to camera 1 and then to camera 5. Then we want to flash Minnie on camera 2, then 8 to send her all the way back to camera 9. Remember to do the Daisy manipulation trick when switching to camera 8, so we don't have to wait for the camera beacon's cooldown here. From now on, we will follow a pretty basic cycle until the music box on camera 5 runs out. We want to deal with whoever's in the attic, then lure Willy and Dippy, flash Minnie, erase Belial, lure Willy and Dippy again, flash Minnie again, and repeat. Simple enough. However, once the music box on camera 5 runs out, we're gonna have to switch things up a bit. We actually want to let Willy and Dippy progress to camera 1, so we kinda just flash Minnie and wait for a bit before we lure Willy and Dippy back to camera 1. From there, the cycle just repeats. We're gonna keep luring Willy and Dippy to camera 1 until that camera runs out as well. Ideally, this should happen around 4 AM. After using the last possible lure we can get out of camera 1, we immediately want to switch them to camera 7 now, where we will attempt to keep them for the rest of the night. The 4 AM transition is by far the biggest choke point in this night, since we have to get an extra lure in. But for regular Nightmare, it's really not too bad. From there, we just repeat the cycle, and eventually, boom, you've unlocked Corruptus, which for me was the last character I needed to reach the real max mode of Oblitus Casa, True Nightmare. True Nightmare is on a whole nother level than anything else in this game so far, adding 6 new characters we need to deal with on top of these 7 that we already were. And to be completely honest, we're not even gonna stop there. You see, in Oblitus Casa, when you die, you get a second chance to come back to life 1 hour earlier by playing a minigame called Post-Mortem. However, this red star here is only awarded if you complete True Nightmare without dying and coming back from Post-Mortem. This is the hardest non-self-imposed challenge on the current version of Oblitus Casa. True Nightmare, no Post-Mortem. Since I'm used to not having a second chance in these kinds of challenges anyways, this felt way more natural for me, and so I never even bothered to learn how to do the Post-Mortem minigame. I've heard it's really easy, but I wouldn't know. I've never done it. Also, since True Nightmare No Post-Mortem doesn't really roll off the tongue very well, and True Nightmare is kind of an overused name for FNAF Max modes anyways, from now on, I'll be referring to this challenge as just No Post-Mortem, which sounds a lot cooler in my opinion, is more unique, and is how most people refer to this mode anyways. It's hard to describe what exactly gives No Post-Mortem its difficulty. I wouldn't say it's game sense carried, or memory, speed, aim. Rather, I think it just requires a bit of everything. And it has this unique X factor of requiring you to be able to gracefully navigate through the cameras without triggering Daisy or Corruptus. For example, if you mess up your Daisy manipulation, at best you're going to lose a couple seconds of the beacon cooldown, and at worst you let Daisy in and can't open the cameras for way too long to survive. Hey Ingots, you said this was the hardest non-self-imposed challenge on this version of the game, right? Yes. But isn't beating True Nightmare without the Post-Mortem minigame kind of self-imposed? Well, you could definitely argue that, but I'm gonna go with the max mode list logic on this one. Since we get an in-game reward for completing No Post-Mortem, that means the game recognizes this challenge. There is code written in the game files to differentiate between No Post-Mortem and regular True Nightmare. In addition, if we want to 100% this game, we need to get this red star, so we would have no choice but to complete this challenge this way. So, since No Post-Mortem is inherently part of the game, it is not considered self-imposed by the max mode list, and so I don't consider it self-imposed either. So now it's time to introduce our new cast of characters. Introducing Cabin Face. This guy is our final attic character. When he appears in the attic, you must right-click on his eyeball, which bounces around like the DVD logo, or he'll jump scare you. Next up is Celester, our second carpal tunnel animatronic. He can appear in these 3 locations in your office. While in your office, he will slowly degrade your vision more and more, which isn't lethal on its own, but can make seeing Cabin Face's eyeball much more difficult, as well as differentiating Pete from the other attic characters, and just overall makes things a bit trickier. To get rid of Celester, you must look away from him if he appears on the sides of the room, or pull up the cameras if he appears in the middle. These 2 characters add a bit of difficulty, but overall don't make too much of a difference on their own. But next up is someone that makes a world of difference. Photo Negative Mickey is one of the hardest characters in the game. When he appears, you must go into the cameras and shut off a camera using the spacebar. That's right, True Nightmare is not shy about introducing entire new controls that weren't present anywhere else in the game. The base game and Nightmare only required 1 input, your left click, but with True Nightmare, we already introduced 2 more and we're not even done yet. Photo Negative Mickey gives you about 4 seconds to shut off a camera before he jump scares you, and he can't spawn while you're in the attic. Inkplot Micmic, or IB Micmic for short, introduces our final keyboard input for blinking. Whenever IB Micmic shows up making a very loud and hard to miss laughing sound, we must blink by pressing left shift. Since the blinking has a bit of a cooldown and he only gives us a few seconds to blink, it's best not to spam left shift. You want to save your blinks for when he actually shows up. Overall though, he ends up being pretty easy. You know who's not pretty easy? The next character, who is, in my opinion, the hardest character in No Postmortem, Oswald. Oswald is very similar to Photo Negative Mickey. He will appear in the room every now and then, and you have 4 seconds to shut off a camera to get him to go away. The reason I consider Oswald so much harder though is because he's actually slower than Photo Negative Mickey. You might expect him to be easier because he's slower, but that's just not how it works. Photo Negative Mickey is fast enough to appear on every cycle, but Oswald isn't, making him much less predictable. In addition, if you're on a cycle where you expect Oswald not to show up, right before you go into the attic, there is a chance that Oswald could snipe you right at the very last second. Assuming you can react in time, this will make you go back into the cameras and turn off a camera before going into the attic, which not only wastes a lot of time, but also messes up your daisy manipulation and can throw off your tracking of which cameras are currently turned off. Oswald is actually the key to beating No Postmortem, but I wouldn't realize why until a few days before my completion. Finally, we have the man who made us take on the original Nightmare, Corruptus. Corruptus's duplicates will show up on your camera occasionally. When they do, you get about 1 second to either close the cameras or switch to a different camera, or Bro will spit straight facts, and his real body will move forward a camera. If Corruptus moves forward a total of 5 times with his real body, you get jump scared. Corruptus's duplicates can actually be stalled if Daisy is currently on the camera, or while luring Willy and Dippy. However, the music box will not stall Corruptus unless Willy and Dippy are actually close enough to be lured by it. Okay, that's all the characters. So, normally this is the part of the video where I talk about some surface level strategies to give you a better idea of what I'm doing. But for now, I'm only going to go over the stuff that I knew going into this, and slowly add some more stuff as we go. The stuff I knew about how to play this max mode beyond just what the characters do was nothing. This was the first time I went into a max mode without any kind of guide or anything at all to help me, so I was on my own. Since then, Lufu has actually made a really in-depth guide that I'd recommend to anyone attempting to go for this mode. But for me, I was attempting this all the way back in August 2025, before that guide was even made. So welcome to the part of the story where Ingits flails around randomly until he stumbles on something that kind of works. My plan going into this was to slowly build up to it by adding characters, but looking back, this is probably the only challenge I've done so far where that won't help me. At least not at the point that I'm at. The only thing that this probably did for me was shorten my lifespan because of this kind of thing. Who the f is that? I'm pretty sure these Easter eggs are turned off when going for True Nightmare since I didn't see any while going for No Postmortem. But while building up to it, I saw these guys multiple times. My first success was beating 920, with all of the main characters plus Lester, Cabin Face, and IB Micmic active. To be honest, this was barely harder than regular Nightmare, and I beat it in a little over an hour of playtime. Then I decided to add Photo Negative Mickey and Oswald, which to be honest is barely easier than full No Postmortem. So after a couple hours of attempts at this, I ended up just adding Corruptus anyways. This is why I said building up to this challenge doesn't really help, at least not the way I did it. We went from barely harder than Nightmare to barely easier than True Nightmare in just 2 characters. So, how were the runs going? Yeah, pretty pathetic. My first session was only barely able to scratch 2 AM. My problem was that I was failing to track which cameras were available to be turned off for Oswald and Photo Negative Mickey. In addition, Oswald and photonegative Mickey were interfering with my daisy manipulation way too much. When I said earlier that I was basically flailing around, yeah, that's pretty much what my early runs were like. Luckily, I would get my first improvement in the strategy really early on. When shutting off a camera for photonegative Mickey or Oswald, you want to turn off a camera that does not give you any vital information, unless you are truly desperate. This should be pretty obvious, and I caught on to that before even going into this challenge. But for some reason, my brain just forgot about camera 9. I was just cycling between turning off cameras 2, 3, 6, and 4. None of these cameras provide us with any information needed to beat the night, so they were pretty expendable. But I guess because camera 9 is outside, my brain just forgot about it. And yeah, once I started adding that to the camera cycle, I was starting to see some improvement. But we still have a very long way to go, especially with photonegative Mickey and Oswald, because my PB after the first full day of attempts was only a 2:30 run that died to Willy of all characters. That run had some problems during the 2 AM transition where Dippy was lured by the music box, but there wasn't enough music box to lure Willy too, which led to some desync that killed me shortly after. This was just an issue with not using the music box optimally and wouldn't be a problem with some more practice. And that was actually the last time I would ever stream Oblitus Casa. I usually prefer to just do small sessions of attempts throughout the day if I can, and that does not really translate well to streaming. On top of that, this was when I would take the first of my 2 major breaks while playing this challenge. School was just starting and I was working on a lot of other things, including things for this channel, some of which you'll see very soon hopefully. And all of that led to me procrastinating learning this challenge for a literal month. I wouldn't pick this challenge back up until September 19th, exactly 1 month later. And that is where our journey continues. By this point, I was starting to catch on to some things that would partially help me in the short term and would be the seeds for something greater in the long term. My strategy at this point was to more or less follow a script for the first couple of hours. The animatronics in Oblitus Casa move consistently enough to do this for the first few cycles of the night, but things will eventually get too desynced and you'll be back to playing the game like normal. Even still, this was initially helping to take some of the pressure off of me as far as keeping track of things for the duration that it did work. The problem is, it was just pretty rare for it to keep working past 1:30, but that was long enough to start seeing some PBs into the 3 AM territory. Ideally, I'd just get better at tracking things instead of following a script, but that has to be my worst skill set as a max mode player, so it was going to be a while before I could do that consistently. And after some more time playing with the script, I was able to notice something that's really hard to explain, but would soon help me reach the 4 AM transition for the very first time. While trying to work on my daisy manipulation, I noticed that the game naturally had 3 types of cycles, which I refer to as A cycles, B cycles, and C cycles. A cycles are the first in the sequence that they follow. They start by luring Willy and Dippy, then flashing Minnie, then shutting off camera 2 for photonegative Mickey, then erase Belial, lure Willy and Dippy again, flashing Daisy in the process, then Oswald will show up. Around this time, one of the attic characters is probably waiting for you, but we still need to flash Minnie and turn off a camera for Oswald. And there's a really neat trick we can do to make this as smooth as possible. We're going to switch to camera 4 for our daisy manipulation and shut off that camera for Oswald. This lets us deal with both of them at the same time. After that, we are free to flash Minnie and enter the attic. This trick is even more satisfying to pull off than regular daisy manipulation. There's also a chance that photonegative Mickey will show up before the second Willy and Dippy lure. If this happens, just shut off camera 2 first and make sure to flash Daisy before switching to whatever camera Willy and Dippy are being lured to. It's only a minor difference and ultimately you'll end up in the exact same place. B cycles are next in the order they appear in. The most notable aspect of B cycles is that Oswald won't show up during them. At least that's the idea. For B cycles, we start by luring Willy and Dippy and flashing Minnie like usual. Then erase Belial again, and shut off camera 6 when photonegative Mickey shows up. Now lure Willy and Dippy again, making sure to be ready to flash Daisy as she will always be on that camera here. Now we need to flash Minnie and we can enter the attic, but make sure to do the Daisy manipulation before switching to Minnie's camera. The important thing to remember about B cycles is that they are very fragile. If you're too slow, or sometimes even for no reason, you can get sniped by Oswald. I mentioned earlier why this is so bad, but be ready for it because B cycles happen to be the only cycles where Oswald can snipe you like this. If you do get sniped by Oswald here, the cycles will get shifted, and the next cycle will probably end up being another B cycle. C cycles are probably the most satisfying in my opinion. Like all cycles, C cycles start with you luring Willy and Dippy and flashing Minnie. This time though, Oswald is going to show up really early, so we're going to shut off camera 4 before erasing Belial. Then we switch to camera 9 and immediately flash Daisy and shut off this camera. From here we are free to lure Willy and Dippy and flash Minnie and go into the attic. Now that probably all sounds really complicated, and to be fair it is a lot to learn. but for me at the time it was worth it, as these cycles kept perfect track of the Daisy manipulation, had a plan for every possible photonegative Mickey and Oswald appearance, and even kind of helped with remembering which camera to shut off. But to anyone that wants to try this max mode, I strongly recommend against using these cycles, as this is kind of an inconsistent prototype version of the strategy that I ended up developing later on. You see, there is a major problem with these cycles, and that is that they can get shifted over way too easily, which shifts which cameras you need to shut off for the rest of the night. And overall, the strategy just is really unflexible. But for me, it was still a huge improvement over just following a script, which was more than enough to reach the 4 AM transition for the first time. In fact, this strategy is actually really consistent for the first 2 hours of the night, so I was able to reach 2 to 3 AM runs almost every single time. And that actually led to me not only getting one 4 AM run, but actually several of them. Unfortunately, the 4 AM transition kinda has hands, and I would need some practice to get good enough at dealing with it. And although my current strategy is a major improvement, it just wasn't consistent enough to get that practice. Sure, it's great for the first 2 hours of the night, but past that, it's kind of garbage. And this is when I took my second major break from Oblitus Casa. I wouldn't even pick this back up again until October 10th, but while I was gone, I was thinking about some things. In my head, I was wondering how to possibly explain what the differences in the cycles were for this very video. That's right, I've literally been planning for this video to come out since October. I don't procrastinate at all. Anyways, while I was thinking, that's when I realized that the key to beating no postmortem lies in Oswald. The main advantage to my old strategy was that you didn't have to track as many things. As long as you knew which cycle you were on, you didn't need to keep track of Daisy, Oswald, photonegative Mickey, and at least until it gets offset, which camera you need to shut off next. But if you think about it, photonegative Mickey shows up every cycle, so tracking him is kind of pointless. And since Daisy shows up every second camera flip, our Daisy manipulation is affected by whether the amount of camera switches we need to do in a cycle is odd or even. For Nightmare, the amount of camera switches we needed to do per cycle was always 4, switching to Willie and Dippy's camera twice, and switching to Minnie's camera twice. But now that we've added photonegative Mickey and Oswald, these guys will add 1 extra camera switch each per cycle, but only when they show up. Photonegative Mickey will always show up, so no matter what, we will always have at least 5 camera switches per cycle. But Oswald only shows up around 70% of the time, meaning sometimes we need to do an even 6 camera switches and sometimes we need to do an odd 5 camera switches, meaning that the amount of camera switches we need to do being odd or even completely depends on Oswald, and by extension, our Daisy manipulation is completely dependent on Oswald as well. So yeah, it's kind of been Oswald the whole time. If we can track Oswald, we can track which cycle we're on, and adjust much easier even if the cycles do end up shifting. Unfortunately, we lose the advantage of knowing what cameras to turn off. But hey, what's one extra thing to track at this point if it means we can get this level of flexibility and consistency? So now that we've gone over why Oswald is the center of the universe in this game, here's what the cycles really are. A cycles are cycles where Oswald shows up late, usually after erasing the drawing. Because of him showing up so late, usually when switching to his camera, you naturally won't be landing on a Daisy appearance, meaning that you can just go straight to Minnie's afterwards. B cycles are cycles where Oswald doesn't show up, but he's usually pretty close to showing up by the end of them, so this can accidentally become an A cycle if he does. Because we aren't switching to his camera before flashing Minnie, we end up needing to do the Daisy manipulation here. C cycles are cycles where Oswald shows up early, usually before erasing Belial. Because of how early he shows up, you'll often end up repelling both Oswald and photonegative Mickey before the second Willie and Dippy lure. And other than the Daisy flash when photonegative Mickey shows up, both Daisy appearances will naturally happen when we switch to camera 8 to flash Minnie. Even just from me explaining it, you can see just how much more simple the cycles are now that we know that Oswald is the center of all of them. With all of this information, we can know what to do an entire cycle ahead of time. If Oswald showed up early this cycle, there's a good chance he'll show up late next cycle, meaning we will get an A cycle. If Oswald showed up late, there's a good chance he won't show up at all next cycle, meaning we will get a B cycle. And if Oswald didn't show up this cycle, there's a good chance he'll show up early next cycle, meaning we will get a C cycle. And this provides a lot of flexibility, since if we expect to be on an A cycle, but Oswald shows up earlier than expected, we know there's a good chance he might try to snipe us next cycle, and we can plan accordingly. With some practice, the strategy ended up being insanely consistent, and I was already getting more 4 AM runs on my first day of trying it. More 4 AM runs means more practice with the 4 AM transition, and so, unsurprisingly, not long after, I started to get runs that successfully passed the 4 AM transition. It's all downhill from here. but there is one last hiccup I kind of want to talk about real quick. Don't worry, I promise I won't yap about it as long as I did for Oswald. Now that I was getting runs this far in, I was starting to feel the effects of Celestir's visual distortion. By the time you get really late into the night, Celestir can really mess up your vision if you let him do as he pleases, which can be a huge problem, especially when it comes to the attic characters later on in the night. The biggest issue is this spawn right here. When Celestir shows up in this spot, he will not disappear when pulling up the cameras. This is where the majority of Celestir's uptime happens. To deal with this, we need to constantly close cams and flick our mouse to the right every time he appears. I ended up getting so used to this, I would do this even if he didn't show up sometimes just out of habit. But annoyingly, this, combined with the eraser motion of Belial, was starting to hurt my wrist after a while, so I was really banking on beating this challenge soon. Luckily, my new strategy had my back. With it, I was starting to get runs into the 5 AM territory, and surprisingly consistently too. The 5 AM wall definitely held out as best it could, but with just how consistent I had become, it could only hold me for so long. Oh my gosh! It's fucking over. Please tell me I was recording that. If you ever feel like you've made some questionable decisions, remember that the developers of this game hid this cutscene behind a challenge that was at one point a top 20, and to this day probably only has around 100 victors. As usual, I'm very glad I beat this challenge. Sure, at the end of my completion I did say I hated that, but to be honest that was more of a that was hard, I never want to do that again kind of way. Looking back at this challenge, I actually find myself wanting to play it again sometimes. And all this time, surprisingly, this video was one of the videos I've been looking forward to making the most. But now that it's over, it's time to move on to other things. By this point, I had defeated a decent number of low-level challenges, and I felt that I was about ready to start taking on some bigger fish. But before I move on to what will be the next stage of the ladder, there was one thing I needed to do to prove to myself that I was ready. A final boss of the lower tier challenges. But not from a skill standpoint, because the next challenge I would take on would be a whole different kind of painful, and would make the perfect final boss from a patience standpoint. Hailing from the land of RNG hell, the next max mode I would beat was 50-20, no death coin. Bonus round, hardest rat and cat. That's right, we're doing yet another Five Nights at Candy's 3 mode. Okay, technically this mode is supposed to be called Hardest Rat and Cat All Challenges, but that is a lot of syllables, so I'm just gonna go with Hardest Rat and Cat since the hardest already implies all challenges. But hey, at least it's an improvement over its old name. Rat and Cat All Challenges, Hardcore Cassette, Classic Cat Same Side All Night. Which just rolls off the tongue beautifully, doesn't it? Especially when you're talking about the OG laser pointer version. Like the old name implies, this challenge is the Rat and Cat challenge from FNAC 3 Custom Night, but with some self-imposed challenges attached. We need to complete the entire night without ever rewinding the tape player, and we can never fully flash away Classic Cat to get him to change sides. When I saw this get placed on the AML, I pretty much saw free AML points. But to be honest, learning the cycle actually took me longer than I thought it would. We'll start by breaking this up into 2 different challenges, and combine them when we are ready to do both at the same time. Then we can even go onto OG Laser Pointer if we want. Let's start with Classic Cat same side all night. The hard part here is that it can be really challenging to flash away Classic Cat enough when animatronics attack from the opposite side as him, especially when you get two opposite side attacks in a row, which is what I call the nightmare scenario. For this reason, I usually find it ideal to have Classic Cat on the right side the entire night. Since left side attacks are just magnitudes easier than right side attacks, we can usually repel left side attacks faster and therefore get more time to flash Classic Cat. If we start a night and Classic Cat is on the left, we could just restart the night until we get a run where he's on the right. From there, we just try our best to keep him as flashed as possible. About halfway flashed is usually enough to survive, but ideally we want to flash him even more than this. Now for the bedside sequences. We get a lot of information just by checking which animatronic is on the left side under the bed. If we see Cat, that is good RNG, since that will ultimately lead to us getting a second phase Cat on either the middle or right side, which are both close enough to Classic Cat to not be a threat. But if we see Rat, we will either get a middle or left side attack, with the left side attacks being the hardest to survive. It's also important to flash Classic Cat before looking to the side of the room to lure out Rat, as every millisecond of time we are flashing away Classic Cat here could be the difference of us living or dying by his paws. This challenge is actually interesting because it sort of balances out the RNG a little with regards to which side the animatronics attack from. If they attack from the left, you get an easier attack, but a harder time surviving Classic Cat. And if they attack from the right, you get a harder attack, but an easier time surviving Classic Cat. Now for Hardcore Cassette, or sometimes called No Tape Rewind. The idea here is that we want to play the tape player to reset our sleep progress, but immediately stop it to conserve as much recording as possible. We need to do this twice per cycle, once after surviving Cat's attack, and once after flashing Rat away at the bedside. For the former of those, we need to be as fast as possible with our button presses in order to not die to Rat waiting in our room for too long, especially when combined with Classic Cat same side all night. With both of these challenges at the same time, there are laser tight scenarios that are not only really difficult skill-wise to survive, but also pretty RNG. You see, I mentioned earlier that getting two opposite side attacks in a row is so hard that I called it the nightmare scenario. And that is because after repelling Cat's attack, in our case on the left side, we need to get all the way to the right side of the screen, flash away Classic Cat, play the tape player, then get all the way back to the left side before Rat kills us for being in the room for too long. And it's not like we can just instantly move to the other side of the room either. There is a max speed that the camera can scroll, and for us, that makes the scenario really hard to survive. It doesn't always mean death, but if Cat doesn't twitch enough during his attack, it's pretty much always game over. With both of these self-imposed challenges active, even nerfed Laser Pointer is considered to be harder than OG Laser Pointer without the challenges. And I can maybe see that, but it's really close. After repeating this mode, I just went straight to the same thing, but with OG Laser Pointer. It took a couple of days to get used to it again, but before long, I was at a consistency where I could win. And after a couple of devastating deaths to the Nightmare scenario, I ended up beating that too. But I really don't want to add fuel to the FNAC 3 one-trick allegations, so I stopped there. Well, that's about it for this video. I hope to see you in the next ladder video. Thank you for watching.